Everybody. Oh, and are we recording? Sorry, Melissa. If that's, yep, we already are. Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second lecture of the 2022 Biomedical Research Integrity, or BRI, Summer Lecture Series. My name is Malia Fullerton, and I am Professor of Bioethics and Humanities here at the University of Washington. The United States Public Health Service, or PHS, and its research institutions require that all pre- and postdoctoral researchers supported by PHS training grants receive training in the responsible conduct of research. In addition, the Fred Hutch, who partner with us, require all of its pre- and postdoctoral researchers to receive such training. The UW and Fred Hutch have therefore developed this program of lectures and discussion groups to help its researchers meet this training requirement. Just a few bits of housekeeping before we get going this afternoon. This is just a reminder that this summer, as in the past couple of summers, is a completely virtual program. Attendance credit is tied to the email address that you enter in Zoom. Please strive to use one email consistently, and please type it correctly. If for any reason you cannot attend the lecture live, which you always should be striving to do, please know that each lecture will be recorded and posted shortly after its live delivery. You will need to view the lecture and take the corresponding short content quiz before you receive credit for attendance. In addition, for those attending UW-based discussion groups, it is an excellent idea to watch or review the lecture link to each discussion section before you attend. We are using the Zoom webinar feature here, which allows audience attendees to submit questions via the Q&A box at the bottom of the viewing screen, and we'd like you to submit your questions there as opposed to the chat box. Please feel free to submit your question at any time during the presentation. You may do so as an identified participant or anonymously if you prefer. Other audience members will be able to read the questions as they come in and will have the option of upvoting by clicking the thumbs up icon any question that they are especially interested in having our speaker answer during the Q&A portion of the program. Please do not forget to complete the post-lecture evaluation, which will be sent to you in your attendance confirmation email. This is the primary way by which we can tell that you have attended and engaged with the lecture material. So with that housekeeping taken care of, it is my really wonderful, good pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Adam Leshak. Dr. Leshak is Director of Education Outreach in the Department of Genome Sciences here at the University of Washington. In this role, Adam has developed numerous science outreach activities, facilitated public presentations, trained fellow scientists on effective science outreach, and produced science education videos for audiences of all ages. Dr. Leshak received a BS in biological science with a minor in biomedical science and a certificate in biomedical engineering at Colorado State University, and then went on and earned a PhD in neuroscience at Washington State University, the other Washington. Adam uses gender-neutral pronouns, they, them, and identifies as transgender and gender non-binary. In the laboratory, classroom, and public spaces, they seek to increase visibility and support diversity in all of its forms. So today, Dr. Leshak will be speaking on themes related to the PHS required topic of responsible authorship, as well as its relationship to effective mentorship, with the title Communication Breakdown, Navigating the Tumultuous Seas of Authorship and Mentorship. Adam, thank you so much. Please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Malia. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the BRI lecture series. I'm really excited to present today, and off we go. So just an outline for where we're going today. We're going to start with an introduction and then go over some expectations and perspective setting from where I'm coming from before setting sail on the authorship. And if we have time, we're going to cruise along on the mentorship, but we'll see where we get to at the end of the presentation. So personal introduction, why me? Why was I invited to come and give a BRI lecture series? Well, I was really honored to get the invitation, mostly because I love the BRI lecture series. For me, I'm a giant fan, and I really loved showing up to the discussion sections and having this kind of conversation about research ethics within the research environment. And that oftentimes I would carry that into the lab and spread that around with my peers. And oftentimes we're talking about some really tough situations that unfortunately we run into on a regular basis. And the one issue that I have with coming to present today is that I really don't feel like an expert on authorship and mentorship. I'm learning just like everybody else. And, honestly, I'm coming from a place of having a little bit of imposter syndrome. So bear with me as we go through the presentation today. And so again, why me? I'm not going to pretend that I'm a genius or an expert. And honestly, in order to feel more comfortable about presenting today, I really need to discuss this topic more casually. And so you're going to get serious with a hint of irreverence, which is generally speaking my style. So I want to be less dry and academic and more salty sea captain who's seen some things, spinning yarns along the way, like yar, I've battled the Kraken out at the academic sea and lived to tell the tale. That's going to be more my style today. And I hope you appreciate that because honestly, I really want to be informative and entertaining. I know for some folks today is showing up and watching this video is all about checking the box for the NIH or whatever grant that you're receiving as a trainee. So I really hope that I can be informative and entertaining so that even if you're half paying attention while watching the recording on 2x speed right now, and yeah, I see you 2x watchers. I hope that everyone can get something out of today's presentation. So I appreciate your attention, time, and constructive criticism. It's going to be a little bit goofy along the way, but again, I hope that you learned something and also walk away slightly entertained. And if this is not for you, that's okay. Again, I welcome constructive feedback, and I hope that we still have a good time, but we shall see. So some credentials that I have. So I have 20 years experience as a researcher. I know it might not look like that, but I started off as an EEG technician as an undergrad, working in labs, collecting data, analyzing data in a neuroscience lab. And then I went to Washington State University to study neuroscience. I was very much a basic science researcher there before I came here to UW working at Harborview as a postdoc for another 6 years. And then I've been here in genome sciences for 3 years. I've been here for a long time. I've been doing research for a long time. I'm also an experienced group facilitator. So I helped secure funding while on the board of directors at a transgender support group. I ran that group for a number of years. And then last but not least, I do a lot of work on campus around mentorship training. And so I'm a Center for the Improvement of Mentored Experiences and Research trainer. That's in collaboration with the University of Wisconsin, so the other UW. And I've done a lot of work with them and on campus teaching their curriculum. Okay. So really my passion is for education and communication, especially within the science realm. I really geek out about relationship dynamics and how to have hard conversations within the workplace and with each other in the workplace. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of negative experiences that have helped me along the way, learning how to navigate these challenges. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why I can come today and confidently say, I have something to say. It may not be the most academic, but that's okay. So the lecture format today is a little strange because I'm in my bedroom with the green screen behind me, and I very rarely in a public lecture space would speak for this long in front of an audience without forcing you all to have some kind of conversation with each other in an active learning scenario. So making the best of the situation that we have today. And so I guess talking at myself on screen will just have to do, and that's okay. And I'm going to try to have a mock conversation with some special guests I've invited if we have time for that. And so some of the themes that I carry with me in all the different kinds of mentorship talks that I do is all about rules and regulations, non-binary answers, power dynamics, incentives, preparation, and being proactive. And more than anything, it's all about having really good communication. And so throughout today's talk, you're going to hear communication come up on a lot of different themes. And within communication, I think it's really important to set the perspective from where I'm coming from and just have some expectations for what kind of information you're going to be receiving from me. So first and foremost, my journey in academia has been tough. I've stuck around long enough to still be here, and my opinions and my experiences are not universal, and my opinions and experiences are my own. A lot of the challenges and changes that I've had to navigate have been around my gender identity. And for example, I'm going to show one of the titles of my publications, and it does have my dead name within that space. It's a regular occurrence. I'm going to be fine, but not everybody has that kind of privilege. And so I've also considered myself a campus survivor. I'm very familiar with the campus ombudsman, Title IX office, bias reporting tools on campus. Like I said, I've seen some stuff and I've navigated some really tricky situations. I'm also a faculty ally on campus, and so I've helped a lot of trainees navigate challenging situations, some on authorship disputes throughout the years that I've been a faculty member. And I also come from a place of privilege in that I have been able to stick around and I've been able to risk a lot of challenging situations, because if I were to say get fired, I do have a good support system at home. And one thing that I think I've received feedback on from my superiors is that oftentimes I can come off as angry and bitter, and that I'm only focused on problems. And I really am trying here to identify the problems, but also move forward with ways that we can navigate things better. Because I really love and believe in academia so much. And even though I didn't always have kind of that safe environment to learn and grow and be a trainee, I'm really hoping that we can create a better environment for us to have those conversations in the future. And honestly, I believe in everyone's good intentions. Sharing any negative experience is not to lay blame on an individual. I really strongly believe in good intentions of all parties in each situation that I'm talking about. And I never want to stigmatize, blame, or shame anybody, because really we're doing the best that we can and most people have good intentions. However, our good intentions do not always have good results. And so today, I encourage you to put on your skeptical spectacles, which I like to call your skepticals. That gets me every time. And we're going to take a look at one of the institutions that we are trainees or that we are working in. And I really encourage you to go on this journey with me from a place of compassion and understanding, to take away lessons rather than assigning blame to anybody within the system. And again, when I do these kind of trainings and we're bringing up conflicts within academia or issues within it, I encourage folks to kind of move beyond trying to get like solid answers to different problems. I call that this or that thinking. And I think we can move past that and we can handle a little bit of ambiguity. I really am an advocate for both and situations and non-binary outcomes. And so with the expectations and the perspective setting set, I'm hoping to have some fun on the journey as we set sail on the authorship. So it probably comes as no surprise to anybody in the space that academic authorship is the primary method to document and share results of our research. It is all about communication, so connecting with other scientists, discussing within community, and it's the foundation of the assessment of our scientific merit. The dark side of this, though, is that the rewards that we get from authorship are not inherently commensurate with the amount of labor that we put in as scientists. I am calling this Adam's Mountain of Rejected Hypotheses. And if we look at the very tip top and then magnify that a little bit, you're going to see the very small number of publications that I have on my record over the course of the past very long time. And honestly, the stuff that has made it into journals is not even my best work, because I think oftentimes my best work is buried somewhere deep in the mines of Moria, never to see the light of day, because those were rejected hypotheses. And I'm going to refer back to this article that I found titled "How Much Is My Paper Worth" by Jonathan Chernoff. And it's a very short paper, and I'm pulling quotes from it because they're a very eloquent writer. And so I'm going to read this out loud, but probably in an accent of some sort. Like the proverbial tree falling in an unpeopled forest, data that aren't published don't make a sound. Whether unpublished results can even be said to exist is a question for philosophers. But certainly, such results, tucked away in a filing cabinet or hard drive, have little impact beyond the few people involved in their creation. Love it. And so continuing on the dark side here, the publication process and peer review is extremely challenging and complex. And the longer you're in science, the more you find new ways for it to be challenging. And really, oftentimes it feels like we're fighting to get into a very select few journals so that we can stick around in academia and make a career for ourselves. And since I entered into the academic space, publish or perish was repeated over and over and over. And I'm not sure if you can see the caption of this picture here, but most scientists regarded the new streamlined peer review process as quite an improvement. And sometimes it really feels that way, because there's a big difference between your manuscript gets submitted, you're so proud of your work, and then manuscript accepted. And I think peer review is a different BRI lecture series. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So I'm a bit of a wisecracker. And so one of the things that I found when I was writing my first scientific papers was the inherent conflict of interest involved with trying to get my work published. And so within the acknowledgements, I would always write, the authors of this publication would like to have careers in academic research and therefore must publish the findings of their research in journals that will maximize the impact of their findings. I thought this was very clever until one time we submitted a paper and we didn't take this thing that I slide into the papers out, and the editor caught it, sent it back to us, said, yeah, humor is not welcome in our journal. But I'm really curious what the reviewers would have thought had I included this conflict of interest statement within the paper that we were publishing. Because honestly, as scientists, we are often being judged, especially as we work our way from being trainees to future PIs. And the big question that I find is, am I meritus? Am I good at scientific research practices? Do I develop laboratory protocols? Am I good at mentoring other people, training people in the lab, essentially preparing the next generation? And also, am I good at creative problem solving on a limited budget? A lot of the labs that I worked in didn't have big budgets. And so we had to get very creative with the way that we were doing science at times. And then lastly, I've done this many a times, fixing lab equipment with duct tape. However, those skills that are brought to the forefront oftentimes are outweighed by publications within high-end journals. And another quote from Jonathan Chernoff: "For these people, a religion that requires one to sacrifice at the altar of the big three journals remains. For all its strange rituals and unanswered prayers, a surer route to funding heaven than any other faith." I love that quote. So publications are of significant value, not only to the scientific field, but also to ourselves, probably more important to ourselves, depending on the situation. And so it's very important to publish your work in order to establish yourself and build a career in academia. One might be willing to travel long distances, risk life and limb in order to discover and explore new lands. Of course, you'll need to be the first to discover those new lands and those new findings, even if it's been slightly discovered before in papers years ago. It doesn't really matter in some cases because you must plant your flag on your science like a colonial explorer. For others to appreciate your work, it is not enough to discover, you must lay claim. And to get credit, you've got to put your name on it, right? You got to get your name on it because at the end of the day, that's what science is about in so many ways. I think sometimes there's a conflict between the reasons why you get into science and then the things that you have to do to stay in science. And I think one of the greatest pastimes of academia is to get your name on things. Think about it. We've got laws, theorems, buildings, mountains, effects, scholarships, proteins, animals, plants, equations, razors, you name it. There's a whole host. I even went to Wikipedia and tried to quantify the number of things that are named after scientists, and it's extensive. And so one of the other things is that just getting your name on the paper doesn't necessarily carry equal value across the authors contributing to the paper. The first author is probably the biggest victor within the competition to get your authorship contributed. You might be a co-first author, but if you're the second in line on that paper, it's not quite the same kind of victory. And lastly, you might be a middle author, which is fantastic. And also, you might have spent years on that study only to become et al. Within references. And last but not least is the last author. It is one of those things that I am very tongue-in-cheek about this, but oftentimes it is coming from the lab of the person whose name is on the name of the lab. Again, another thing that you have to put your name on in science. And I would say that oftentimes first authors might wave the flag and paddle the boat, same with along with the middle authors, but the last author is the one that told them where to take the boat. And that's very important. And again, for last authors out there, I'm just kind of winking. This is part of the joke. We know all the things that are contributed. So really what I'm kind of saying tongue-in-cheek here is that publications really serve as credit in a competitive research environment. Your publication is like power, money, prestige. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to say within this lecture, I really thought of publications as being kind of like this currency piece. And there was a song that came up called Put Your Name on It. And I looked at the lyrics and I thought, oh, this is very much applicable to the academic research process. And so I'm going to read some of the lyrics here and just imagine that this person is singing about academic research instead of something else. Put your name on it. I need you to know that I'm special. You won't find anything like it. Don't settle. And I see that you have the potential because no others have ever been successful. No drama. I'm too busy. Did that cross your mind? Own it. You know my worth. Put in overtime. Jealous girls around me. They just want what's mine. A first authorship. Own it. You know what I'm worth. So you better put your name on it. Better play the game for it. Because these opportunities don't come easily. Look what we could be. So you better put your name on it. Move out. These opportunities don't come easily. So you better put your name on it, name on it, name on it. Okay. It's hard to do this without an actual responding audience because I have no idea if any of my jokes are landing. So
yes,
I hope somebody's chuckling out there.
They are landing, okay. Adam, they are landing, yes.
Okay, great. This is one of the things I love about Zoom presentations is I have to pretend like somebody's laughing in my mind. And it's usually myself. So thank you for the feedback, Malia. So again, publications are like currency. And so the true value of a publication is not known, and where you are on the authorship list makes that even more complicated. And so honestly, when I was thinking about this, I was like, I don't know if publications are more like dollars or Bitcoin, because it's whether it's the US dollar or Bitcoin, the true value of these currencies is really based off of what people believe, and it definitely changes over time. And I'm a bit of a Planet Money geek. And when I listen to Planet Money, I just think about how does academic research work, especially when we're thinking about it as kind of a marketplace of ideas. And again, the value of your publication is what people believe it to be. And sometimes marketing can be at play as well. So the more people you can invest in Bitcoin, the greater the value of your Bitcoin, in the same way that the more people you can believe or you can encourage to believe in your research work, the greater the value of your research work. So on top of that, we also have the value of journals and where your articles are being published. So many people will believe that the big three here carry a lot more value than some obscure journal of sorrows. But I will say that over time, it doesn't really matter where it's published if people can catch on to it and identify it as being really quality work. Who knows where it goes? So some examples that have been put forth is the Origins of the Proteasome, a ubiquitin story that led to a Nobel Prize, was published in Biochemistry and Biophysics Research Communications. And the first CRISPR paper was published in Molecular Microbiology. So who knows? Here's some of my publications. I don't know if any of them are going to be, that first CRISPR paper, but I have some work that I'm really proud of. For example, this is my absolute favorite publication that I've ever made. And unfortunately, I have 10 citations on this article that I published, and 5 from my very own lab. So self-referential all the way. I have another publication that kind of pulled out some of the ideas from this first publication that has one of the, I would say my most fun title for any publication that I have, not Lost in Translation. When coming up with it with my PI, I think not everybody in the lab had seen Lost in Translation, so that was an interesting one. I have 3 citations on that. And then lastly, one of my most recent papers, another paper that I'm really proud of. Unfortunately, it only has 5 citations, and 3 are from my own lab or affiliated labs. And so when thinking about what is the financial dollar value of these, if we say $2 per citation, well, that first paper is $20. The ribotag not lost in translation is $6, and the last one is $10, right? But if we subtract away from what we're paying ourselves in our citation lists, the value of these goes down pretty dramatically. Now, if you take that money and you distribute it across the authorship here, a lot of this money is probably concentrated in my pocket rather than the middle authors. And my co-author here is a co-number 1. And unfortunately, I think I get a lot of the attention that poor Kevin is not getting. Kevin, if you're watching, I appreciate the work that you did on this paper. So ultimately, I'll never know the actual value of my publications. This is a joke. Writing research papers can be fun. And so I'm going to close this section with another Jonathan Chernoff quote, because I just fell in love with their writing. So, what then is your paper worth? In the long run, its chief value is what the world makes of it. That is a discovery of importance, whether delivered to the public with a blare of sirens in a top-tier journal or with a quiet plop in an obscure blog, will in time enter the wider scientific world as a supporting strut for an existing paradigm or a building block for a new one. So do not get discouraged out there. It doesn't necessarily matter where you're publishing. And this is just one last idea within the whole publications as currency idea that I had. And I probably spent way too much time thinking about this and trying to see if other people are thinking about this within the literature. But is there such a thing as authorship inflation? We have so many more scientists and so many new PhDs getting created and publishing papers and so many more journals. Is inflation a potential pitfall of the whole academic publishing endeavor? And the answer is yes. There might be too many journals and too many people on each publication, which would then diminish the value of each publication. But then the journals have figured that out, and they can create additional spin-off journals, siphoning submissions to lesser journals to still make money by an ever-growing number of desperate scientists. Then the big thing to remember is that science publishing is all about maximizing the profit margins, always limiting publications in the highest tier journals to maintain the value of a publication in their journal while thriving off the desperation of aspiring scientists in a never-ending pursuit to maximize credit for their hard work in order to keep their careers. It's all about the money, right? Got to publish, got to get the research grants, got to get the money. Okay, I digress. I hope that was slightly entertaining. Moving on to some of the solutions that have been proposed to mitigate some of the problems with authorship. And one of the things that I think through the course of my career I've seen increase over time is having very explicit authorship criteria. So each journal that you might apply to might have very specific rules for who can be an author on that paper. And so within the materials that were sent out, the ICMJE recommends that authorship is based on meeting all of the following four criteria. And interestingly, they include this "and" moniker at the end. So I'm going to read that, but I'm going to read it with a lot of force. So substantial contributions to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data for the work, and drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content, and final approval of the version to be published, and agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work in ensuring that questions related to accuracy or intention of any part of the work are appropriately investigated and resolved. So that is a lot to contribute to authorship. And there was some really good critique of this, of these rules. And personally, when I read this, I thought, well, not in my research lab. Because oftentimes what I found is that the contributions within our lab is not always clear. We're bouncing off ideas in real time, or bouncing ideas off each other in real time throughout the day. And it's not always clear who contributed what idea, especially when we have group lab meetings. I think they sent out a really good example of how different early career researchers oftentimes get left off of papers, partly because they're moving on to other aspects of their career during their training, and it takes a long time for papers to get published. And if you're like me, you notice that timing can definitely be an issue. I've seen this happen multiple times where the first author moves on to industry in the middle of revisions, and then somebody that is the second or third or fourth author has to then put in the labor to get the paper out, or it falls on the PI who's the last author, and they're overworked already, so they don't have enough time to necessarily push this paper through, and it can take years sometimes to get it out. In response to the ICMJ article, these authors put out a critique of that, of those regulations, and identified ways in which it's not necessarily inclusive of research collaborators. So I really encourage you to spend some time looking over that paper. I'm not going to go into detail there because I'm short on time. And then lastly, I found an article talking about giving credit where credit is due. by essentially having pie charts that then take the different aspects of the paper publishing or the paper development and then identifying who's contributing what proportion of the pie in each of those different categories. And within the publisher perish world, I will say that we're really trying to survive and thrive off of credit and merit, with the idea that there's scarceness out there of what can be discovered. There's also a power dynamic at play between trainees that are essentially transient employees of the laboratory or of the university, intersecting with the tenured faculty that are really results driven. And I'm not going to go into the PhD comics, but if you're not following PhD comics, I strongly recommend that you do. And honestly, what I see is that oftentimes this power dynamic can rear its ugly head, even though there's no harm intended, because the pressures are really significant at each level. I'm going to not go into detail here, but I tell the story of the legend of the unpublished postdoc, who is one of my most influential mentors. By far, the most meticulous scientist I've ever been around, and wasn't able to get any articles published because he was always finding really good ways of undercutting his work. But his meticulousness has really paid off over time, in that he's developed a career in a lot of equipment maintenance and equipment technology. And he's just been had an amazing career journey supporting so many different scientists, and I appreciate him deeply. And so sometimes navigating authorship can be really tough, and it can kind of feel like we're playing D&D, and when you're applying for your credentials, you roll a dice, and who knows whether your paper is going to get accepted or rejected, or your proposal. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time with this idea of the car salesman or used car salesman, where oftentimes when we're thinking about a desperate used car salesman, like what kind of stories will they spin in order to sell a car, in order to support their family, alongside this car salesman's boss, who is also really desperate to make sure that the business that they work at is continuing to function so that they can hire this person to sell the cars. And they're under a lot of pressure to get to support themselves. And so when that pressure gets high, misbehavior kind of goes along with it. And so when we look at car salesmen and we're like, oh yeah, of course they're going to lie about it, it's no wonder that there's all sorts of bad actors within science. And my hope is that we can kind of work past a lot of those issues. And instead of going into the case study, we're at 46 minutes. I think I'm going to open it up for questions, unless I should go to 50 minutes, Malia.
I have, my clock says it's 4:40, so I think you can take 5 more minutes.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so this is where things might get a little bit strange. So because I don't have an audience to discuss with, I'm going to read over this case study and then have a short conversation with 2 of my peers inside my house. So in this case study, 3 graduate students, so I'm speaking from the place of a PI. 3 of my graduate students work collaboratively on closely related projects. One of the students conducted a synthesis of several of our studies and wrote it up as a separate paper. On the first draft of the manuscript, he did not put his lab mates' names on the paper. I asked him why he didn't, and he said he felt strongly that they did not deserve authorship because the data were already published as separate projects, and that he had done the work of synthesizing their findings into a new story. Rather than arguing with him further, I gave him permission to circulate the draft to the rest of the lab for feedback. The next day, the other 2 students on the large project came to my office complaining that they felt they deserved authorship on the paper. I told them that I agreed and I would put them on the paper. When I told the student who wrote the paper to add their names, he was very upset and started pointing out other instances in which he thought he should have been on their papers, but wasn't. Finally, I said, I'm the PI on this project and I make the final decisions. All three of you should be on this paper, no more discussion. The student stormed out of my office and would not reply to my emails for a week. Our relationship is still strained. How do I repair it? Well, for me, I love the 4 R's. First is recognizing what are the issues being raised, what is the underlying ethical concern, and how does the issue impact me as the PI? What values are at stake? Are there competing points of view? And what are the potential benefits and harms of different actions? Are there any rules or guidelines that can help? What are my responsibilities? Do others have responsibilities also? What should I do and why? And so I'm going to pass it off to a representative that has been at the university for a very long time, Dr. Robbie.
Why, hello, I really appreciate this case study, and I like the way that the mentor really came down hard and drew the line down and said, I'm making the decisions. Because if I get too many people coming and complaining about authorship, it's really bad lab dynamic, and it's best that I take it upon myself to make the decisions for everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Robbie. Do we have a perspective from anybody else by chance?
Yeah, so I'm a new graduate student, and I appreciate your perspective, Dr. Robbie, but honestly, these other 2 students have worked really hard as well. And I think that this student's being a little bit too bossy and a little bit too demanding, and they can get first authorship. So, well, I don't see what's the problem with adding the other 2 students.
Okay, well, you can imagine if we actually had people together in a room, we could have a very serious discussion about what we should be doing and what kind of things should have been happening. And so for me, the major takeaways from this case study is communication, in the sense of like the 4 people need to really have a conversation, after the problem happened. But honestly, they really needed to have that conversation at the beginning of the research project. So being proactive rather than reactive. Third is being transparent about the process of deciding who should and should not be authors on these papers. And then also the power dynamic at play. So in some cases, it might be appropriate for the boss essentially to pull seniority and push through conflict. And in other cases, it would be better to take an egalitarian approach to have a conversation with other people. And very briefly, I'm going to share a real world example that I had that I call the showdown. And so this is me in the lab a number of years ago, and we were studying these receptors that travel to the primary neuronal cilia. So we were transfecting in plasmids that would express this receptor that would then travel to the receptor. And I found this very strange thing where if I took the plasmid and I transfected it in at too high a concentration, so too high of a gene dose, my neurons would get all sorts of messed up and the receptor would spill out of that cilia into other parts of the cell. So I then went and did a dose response curve looking at that, and the location of the receptor to the cilia was dependent on how much of the receptor I was expressing. And when I expressed a ton of it, we got all sorts of weird things happening. And so I was very meticulous about putting together this experiment because it went against a lot of the experiments that have been done in our lab and in other labs previously. But when I brought this to my PI, I think they were challenged by the fact that this undercut a lot of the work that had been done by our competitors as well as by us, and that by putting this out would be very controversial, and that we should probably put it somewhere else in the paper and not feature it prominently within the experiment. And in some ways, I maybe was a little bit more dramatic than I needed to be in that situation. And I said, this figure goes into the paper, otherwise I'm walking away. And that was probably a little too far for me to go. But ultimately, he said, okay, but if they ask us to take it out, we have to take it out. And to my surprise, and I think everybody in the labs, molecular pharmacology ended up making that figure the cover art. And what I love about the way that we concluded that situation and that conflict is that my PI ended up being the biggest promoter of the cover art on this paper. And what I would say is that that conflict really helped us grow in our relationship over time, even though in the moment things were very, very hot. And what I would say is that you can, find a way to navigate these conflicts within laboratory spaces. And so I encourage you to check out the entering mentoring or the entering research trainings from the Cymer group. I was going to pull a few more case studies, but we're at time, and I hope that you enjoyed this very strange presentation, and thank you for sailing.
Thank you so much, Adam. I do believe that that was the first use of creative puppetry in a BRI lecture. It was awesome. Lots of expressions of gratitude in the Q&A, which I invite you to take a look at. You have left us a bit of time for questions, and I think that's great. And there are beyond the appreciations both for your style as well as sharing your personal perspective. There were a few questions about authorship too. I mean, and I think
Great.
I do want to say first one thing is last week we had our first lecture on research misconduct, and there was a question in that lecture about what the biggest misconduct proceedings on campus are about, and I believe that Dr. Severson said authorship. And so this is a perennial issue. We all have, any of us who've been around for a while have stories, and I so appreciate sharing from your personal experience. Anyway, so let's see here. One question, which I think has received a number of thumbs up, is I've heard a large number of first co-authors in a paper can have an unfavorable impact, particularly for grants or awards. Not should we or shouldn't we, but why? Why would that be the case? So can you talk a little bit about that with regard to this sort of perhaps, your financial metaphor?
So to me, I find it to be really confusing. But I also think, though, that there is a mindset that's rather prevalent within the community that you need to be an independent research first and foremost, and that you might have to be kind of, because the environment is so competitive, you might have to be the most competitive person in that space. And therefore, you don't let somebody else share the credit in the way that a co-first authorship might do. And also, I think a lot of the people that are making the decisions about merit regarding co-first authorships probably was a trainee during a time that was unheard of. That was not something that was done. You had your project and you held on to it. And I think sometimes when things are different and new, people that are used to kind of more traditional ways of doing it are really challenged by something new coming along, because then they're like, well, then how do we determine who's the best? And I think that's a fair question. But personally, I really appreciate the kind of the co-first authorship, because it was a lot of work for both Kevin and I to get that publication out. And we brought very different elements to the project as well.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Another question here from another anonymous attendee. Do you think the academic environment and authorship would be different if negative results were more frequently published? Do you think publication should no longer be our only currency? I think these are very provocative questions. What do you think about these issues?
Um, I love the idea of finding a way to put negative results out there, or at least to put them into a space that they can be discussed. I was a I was a really big proponent and advocate for this while I was a trainee, and some mentors did a really good job of establishing the practical element where they said, I would much rather you try to get your positive results published than spend a lot of time publishing your negative results in some fashion. And in hindsight, I wish that I know that there are systems in place for sharing these findings in scientific communities, but I have a little bit of regret for not finding those communities and really being an active part of that. So I encourage folks to do that. And I have kind of an idea incubating in my head for what I call a fail jam, or like a fail share, where we essentially have research talks where people are competing to see who learned the most from their failure. And the presentation is really about the setup of rejecting a hypothesis rather than the way that a lot of research papers go, where you're following this story towards success and genius. So yeah, thanks for that question.
Yeah, and I think maybe a direct follow-up to that was someone asking about what are these communities? Can you name a few?
I'm unfortunately I'm 3 years out of the basic science research, and so I unfortunately don't know of any, but I'm sure there are folks around campus that can make that connection.
I'm not totally sure I understand the question, but maybe you do. How can we claim our names on already published papers? Is that possible?
I've heard that a lot of journals are making it easier for folks to amend their names on publications. One story that I didn't share was that before I came out as a graduate student, I did some work on a project that never came back to me to review before final publication. It's kind of commonplace at the time. I don't know how common it is anymore, but they misspelled my last name really badly. And so then we had to submit a core agendum to that paper. And now when you find that on PubMed, it says core agendum before the title of that article. And I'm sure if that article was going to get any attention, my need for a core agendum on there was going to prevent that from happening. But I think the practices are changing. I haven't made the effort to change my name on any of my historical papers, but I also have been changing my name slowly over those papers. And so, yeah, it's something that if I ever find the time to do it, I will, but that's tough to find the time to put that extra effort in.
Okay. Let me see here. Oh, a question has just come in. Tips for repairing strained relationships with mentors or mentees. Any thoughts on that?
So I think the best resource that I know of on campus right now is the Faculty Allies program. If people aren't familiar with how that works, is that there's a group of faculty specifically within the School of Medicine that are acting as resources to connect folks with exactly this kind of navigation of interpersonal conflict. Or, let's say that the issues that come across the table are pretty wide, and oftentimes these allies are looking for resources so that the person that's kind of impacted by it doesn't have to do it all on their own. And So if you have an issue, you bring it to the faculty allies. We review kind of what kind of resources you need. We then pair you with faculty members who are outside of your department space, and then they connect you with the resources that you need to navigate the situation. I think I sometimes am a little, I'll just be very honest with who I am as a person, because I'm very dramatic, and I wear it with a badge of pride, and also it can cause problems. Like, if we don't put this figure in, I'm going to quit. And like, yeah, that's those kind of ultimatums, I would say, are not productive. I think if I could go back in time, I would have been a little bit softer on that, as saying, this is where I'm at a 9 with regards to how passionate I am about this. Where are you at? And then, my PI might be able to say, I'm like a 5. And then it's like, okay, great. How can we get to a 7 between 5 and 9 to then, figure out what that looks like in that space? Or perhaps we reach out to the editor and say, do you have thoughts on this? There's ways that we could work around it. But when you're in conflict with somebody that might have power over you, I know personally, I find I'm not comfortable speaking up to that person. And so that's what the faculty allies and these other resources are all about, is you reach out laterally, but kind of at an angle up, to other people that are peers with the person with power. And then you essentially create a triangle there where you have people that can be your advocate or ally to protect you from kind of the crushing weight of the power dynamic between the two of you. And so I think finding somebody adjacent and up to have that conversation can be really effective. So even if you have a committee member, reaching out to your committee members. I didn't do that enough as a graduate student. I strongly recommend it.
Thank you. We are just about at time. So even though one other question came in, but I don't think we have time for it. But many expressions of gratitude. People love, and I think it was wonderful for you to kind of confess your imposter syndrome, Adam. But I mean, for example, one anonymous attendee saying this is the best webinar I have ever attended. So give yourself a little pat on the back, imposter syndrome or no. And thank you so much for being with us and sharing your perspectives on responsible authorship. It was a great presentation. For BRI facilitators who are interested in having a little bit of that after chat with Tim and I, we are hanging on for 30 minutes. Adam, you don't need to hang on for that. This is just something we're doing optionally for facilitators. But thank you again, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you so much, and take care, everybody, and good luck out there. So take care.